Welcome to Tagami Vision. I'm Phil Tagami, and with me today is our council member from District 1, Jane Brunner. Jane, thanks for joining us.
You're welcome.
We've been working on our show on a couple of issues facing Oakland, and really the one of paramount importance that we've been talking about is crime. And we've been noting a trend that has shown an increase from 2002 to 2006 in both property crime and violent crime, and also, alarmingly, a decrease in arrests. And in talking to some folks and in having the DA on the show and having the chief on, we have some different views and opinions as to what some of the causes of that are. Do you have a sense or a feel for why we might be seeing an increase in property crime and violent crime and a decrease in arrests?
You know, I asked that question. It's a great question. And I ask that question of every police officer I see. Because I think the key is, why is this happening now? I've lived in North Oakland for 40 years. I think it's the worst crime spree that I've ever seen. So what is happening? And I've done some national research. Right. And it's not clear what the cause is. It's not clear why it's happening. I think some of the issues that we have to address is not only having the police out there, but, you know, picking people up and making sure we follow through, and making sure that if they need to go to juvenile hall or if they need to go to jail, that happens. But if they don't, then we have to have prevention programs. So let's say you take a kid who is 17 years old. We stopped using the juvenile desk, which meant that when a youth was picked up and had done a crime, the police department did not know for a couple of years if it was the first crime or the 15th.
Wow.
So now they're doing the juvenile desk, and that's good. So now at least we know how many crimes, so we can put them in the right program. But the next thing that has to happen is we got to put them in programs. There has to be natural consequences. It's like your own kid. If you have a 2-year-old and they bite a child in preschool, you don't just give them a hug and say it's fine.
Right.
But, you know, you give them a timeout. We have to do the same thing with juvenile offenders. We have to say there has to be a consequence, and that consequence can be put into a Measure Y program.
As we go back and look at the history, Measure R went before the voters and failed. And some of the opponents to Measure R thought there was not enough to do with diversion, and just it was focused on suppression. Now we have Measure Y, which is a balance, and some would say not enough suppression, too much diversion, and other people say too much diversion, not enough suppression. Now the question is, how do you see Measure Y working? And though it's in its infancy, really, in implementation, because I believe it was a 10-year program, a 10-year policy, how do you see Measure Y affecting crime in Oakland?
Well, Measure Y isn't working because we are doing the prevention programs, but we haven't started putting the suppression programs in. So we have not put the police officers, we've not spent any of the money to put police officers on the street. And we learned that in the city council when we were going over vacancies about a year and a half ago, and we noticed there were 109 vacancies in the police department. Nobody brought that up to our attention to say, hold it, there's a problem, at which point the city council provided $2 million to get more academies. But until we have the right number of police officers on the street, then we can add the 63 extra police officers of Measure Y. Then we'll know if it's going to work.
Right. Okay, so it's sometime I've heard two different dates. Some say that early next year, February, March of '08, the chief was indicating maybe it'd be a little longer, maybe somewhere like this time next year we'll see a fully augmented police force. With the retirements being what they are, I think we've seen 238 hired since Measure Y started, but 235 retire or go out on disability. Is there anything that can be done to reverse that trend, to really help the city get to the number that was considered a full complement of officers?
That's a question for the chief and police officers. I think that we have a young staff. We used to have an average age of 24. I think one of the questions is, why do people leave? Is Oakland just a training ground where someone comes in, is trained, and then they go off and they work in a city that's easier? I know that they now have to pay back some of their training money that's given, but there needs to be some commitment. If we're going to train an officer, I think we need a commitment from that officer. They're going to be here X amount of years. You know, someone who's about to retire, you're not going to change that. They need to retire. But I don't think that's our issue.
Okay. Looking at a transition question, because we always look at also some of the root problems, jobs and job creation. Ex-offenders, Oakland sees close to 3,000 parolees a year coming out of the penal system back into Oakland, and often it's reported, and we see that there are obstacles to people getting back into the workforce and being integrated into the community. From the programs that we have through Measure Y, how are the measurements being done, and how is the throughput being monitored to determine what programs get funded again through Measure Y, or what programs should be augmented?
Okay, so there's two separate things there.
Right.
So when it's actually a job training program that we put someone in, we have a great job training evaluation. And that is, we've had for many years, where we measure a program, how many people did they train, how many people are placed, what the wage is, and what the retention is after a year, 6 months, or a year.
Right.
Measure Y, we have not seen any evaluations yet. So I hesitantly agreed to another year of funding because I was told that it was too early to get the evaluations, but I think it's critical for the committee and for the council and the mayor to make sure we get really clean evaluations, because we do not want to waste the taxpayers' money. We will never get this again.
Right.
If we do not show that the programs we are using are working, and that people are actually getting jobs or are going to school or are changing their lives in some way, we can't go out to the voters again in 10 years.
Sure. In looking at the relationship between the mayor and the council, Oakland having a new mayor for the last 7 months, how is the communication working, and how is the collaboration between those two branches of government?
I can only speak for myself.
Okay.
So I find the mayor accessible. When I call, I get a call back. I had a very serious issue in crime in Temescal and Rockridge. The mayor called me several times. He worked with me. He agreed to move the police officers out of the airport, which Ignacio De La Fuente and myself were pushing for. He was good. His staff is very easy and very accessible.
It's good to hear. The recent news, I know that you're just back in town, the Wayans brothers and the Army base. Where do we go from here? Is there a consensus, do you think, or is it too early to know where we go next?
Well, I don't know if it's a consensus. I haven't really talked to anyone, but I'll tell you what I think.
Okay.
I think the Wayans idea is great. It's creative. It is a good idea. And I'm really sad that they didn't stay in the